And good morning, I'm meteorologist and science teacher Ryan Miller, and thank you for joining us here. This is our first episode of Outside the Classroom here on WJLA 24/7 News. And the reason for this show, well, I guess we could all probably guess what the reason is here. We're out of school right now, we're away from work, and one of the things we'd like to do with this show and this program is turn it into a resource for everybody in our community and basically anyone that's out there right now watching us, whether you're online, whether you're on the television and watching us here, we're here for you. The objective of this show really, it's about learning. It's not about completing tasks. It's not about getting boxes checked. We're here to learn something new every day. We're here to share as well. I'm a teacher and a resource, and it's an open invitation. Please connect with us. We're here to share some activities, some lessons, anything that we can do to keep that learning process going while we're at home and we're away from school and we're socially distant from so many things. And the other idea here is the focus. The focus is going to be not on what stresses us. The focus of this show, the idea, is what makes us better. What can we learn from and what can we do inside this, or I should say outside of the classroom, to learn something about what's going on in the environment. So we're going to go over some themes over the next several days, themes of the show today, perhaps tomorrow. We're going to invite you to interact with us on Facebook or Instagram. Give us your questions, send us your ideas. We're outside in my house right now, and we're trying our best here to put something together that can be useful to everybody out there. Right now, it's a rainy, gloomy, cold day. I wish we had those warm temperatures from last week, and hopefully we'll see some very soon. But let's go over a couple of things here. We put together some information for you here, and as I mentioned, the ideas behind this show, it's to interact, it's to be a resource, it's to learn, and it's really not something we want to focus on that would cause any stress for anyone. And so let's focus on the task at hand and look at some of the themes that we're going to be going over here. And the idea is patterns. And patterns can show up in life in so many different ways. You've got patterns showing up in design and in art. You've got patterns in music and in life and in nature. In fact, if you listen right now, there's some birds out there. I can hear those birds, and there's a pattern to the sounds coming from them. Don't ask me to identify or tell you what sounds they are, but nevertheless, there's patterns out there. We can hear patterns also in the rain that's falling, patterns in literature. And so with that theme of patterns, let's talk about some activities we can do inside or outside of the house. And I've got one really quickly. If you're waking up and your kids are wondering what we can do on a rainy day, you can't get outside, you can't be with others, well, let's just see if we can grab some blank paper. I'm going to invite my kids to come up for a moment, and I'm going to say, hey, if you could take some of this paper, go inside, Seton Kennedy, go inside the house, and I want you to trace 3 patterns that you can find anywhere and bring them back whenever you're ready. Maybe in about 20-25 minutes, if we could be lucky here. Nevertheless, there's an activity. Send them out. Try to get them looking for some patterns. On a nicer day, you could be outside, looking at patterns on the sidewalk, patterns in the street, patterns on our homes. But there's patterns everywhere. And as we look to putting some of this information together, there's patterns in poetry. I've got several colleagues that I teach with that are wonderful English and literature teachers. And when you look at patterns in poetry, and this is something new to me, but you've got this A-B format and these other formats where you can rhyme. So if your kids are getting up this morning, sit down at the table, come up with some rhymes, put some things together. Here's a very quick poem that I just put together. And this is absolutely no talent on my part here, but our show's team is the best, even on a little rest. We're here to help you learn. Send us your feedback. It's your turn. I'm going to take credit for that, even though it's not very clever. But let's talk about some patterns. Where can you go when it's not raining? Get outside and look for some patterns. I asked this question of my kids yesterday. We were outside. Where do you see patterns showing up as we were taking a walk? And taking a look at this picture here on the screen. Can you look at this picture and identify any of the patterns potentially showing up? And those patterns are actually in the grass. And as we were walking along, I started to notice this pattern. And I asked my kids, why do you think you're seeing the grass greener around all of those poles? And why do you think the grass is actually going to be darker? We'll answer that when we return.
I'm Sarah Congable here at Bluemont Park in Arlington, Virginia. My son, my husband, my other son. And we are out skipping rocks, practicing social distancing. And I was thinking about patterns. So I was looking at these rock formations and started asking my son, Henry, who's 4.5 and knows all of his letters, if he recognized any shapes in the rocks. And as he pointed out to me, several of those big square rocks look like they could be E's or H's, and some of the broken rocks look like they could have points on them like A's, or if you piece them together they could look like an L or an F. No M's, but you know, we're looking for patterns and we're trying to make some literacy connections, and they are everywhere if you just take the time to look. So, enjoy!
And welcome back to Outside the Classroom. I'm meteorologist Ryan Miller and science teacher as well. We're trying to come up with some ideas today. The theme of the show today is patterns, and we're looking for patterns in nature, patterns in poetry, patterns in literature, anywhere we can find patterns. A few minutes ago, I just sent my kids out into the house to try and come up with some ideas of where they would see some patterns showing up, and I could ask them to come up here. Let's take a look and see, where did we get some patterns showing up here? We've got some tracing. Where did you guys get these patterns?
So I got a bunch of tiles. I just found tiles. And
okay.
I got on the wood floor.
Yeah.
There's like little indents from people stepping on them, of course, and just walking.
Oh, cool.
This this is my slime because like I have slime.
Yeah.
I have one slime that's 3
okay.
stacked, and then there's one that's 2 stacked, and then there's 1 stacked.
Okay.
And this one is the cool because it goes small, big, small, big.
Small, big, small, big.
I mean,
great.
Big, small.
Big, small. Well, thank you, guys. I'm going to have you do a few more things in a few minutes. Can you go in the freezer, please, and grab the snowflakes we made so we can talk about some patterns? So head on back, and we'll be see you in a few. I think the co-stars here want to continue their appearances online. We were talking about patterns in poetry before we left, and the poem that I came up with very quickly before we went to break was this one that we can see here on the screen. And take that idea, make some poetry with your kids this morning. Come up with a theme and share it with us. Connect with us on Facebook, on Instagram, WJLA.com. Please check in with us and let us know what you're doing this morning and how we can help, how we can provide some activities or some ideas, tap into the resources that we can try to provide and connect all of us to so we can all get through this together. When we left for break, we talked about this picture, and I wanted to show this picture. We were outside yesterday. We were looking for patterns in nature. As we took our walk, 6 feet apart, of course, 1.83 meters apart, of course. As we were taking a walk, we noticed that there were green patches of grass everywhere, but only in certain locations along the walk. So on the image, you can see that we have green, dark grass that's been growing along all those poles, and we were trying to figure out and ask, what and why is this showing up? And we found out that all of the folks that own dogs and pets in the neighborhood have been taking walks, and as they've been taking walks, well, the pets seem to all identify the same locations where they could possibly go to the bathroom. There's nitrogen, fertilizer in the pee of those dogs, and as they go to the bathroom, well, that's ultimately what we see. The fertilizer ends up causing the grass to grow. That's why it is actually taller than all the grass that's around, and it's also because that fertilizer has nitrogen in it. Well, that's going to cause the grass to appear and be dark green. So there's a pattern showing up in nature, and we took some pictures of some of the different patterns that we've seen. You've got patterns in bricks and all kinds of different patterns that are showing up. This is an interesting pattern to consider and to take into account, and it has a lot to do with direction. This is a tree in our neighborhood, And this tree, we're looking at the tree right now from the west. So on your screens, on the left side of your screen is the north side of the tree. And on the right side of your screen is the south side of the tree. And if you look at the image, there are quite a few differences in the different types of plants that are growing and the different types of things that are showing up. And if you look at the image right here, you can tell that there is a different shade to the different types of plants. And there's a reason for that. And that reason has everything to do with our directions, north, south, east, west. Here in Arlington, Virginia, and all over our area, actually, the sun is always going to be in the southern sky. And the sun rises in the east, but it's always going to, at some point in the day, be in the southern sky. Never directly overhead because we don't live in the equator, but because that sun is in the southern sky, the south-facing sections of trees, like in this picture right here, the south-facing sections are going to have sunlight throughout the day, where the north side and the north-facing sections, and in this tree here, that would be on the left, never get to have direct sunlight. So with that as one of the factors influencing the growth of these plants and the things around the tree, here's an idea for you. Here's an activity. I'm going to grab a magnet. I got this right off of the refrigerator at home. I grabbed a paper clip, and I'm going to take my paper clip and I'm going to rub it against the magnet here for about 30 or 40 times. And as I continue to rub that magnet together with this paper clip, I'm going to magnetize this paper clip. You can do it with a needle, a bobby pin, maybe a nail. It might be a little heavy, but that's one thing we're going to do here. I'm going to take my magnetized paper clip. I'm going to put a leaf from outside into a bowl of water to get it floating. And as I put my magnet on the leaf, it's going to start to turn, and the magnet will actually then begin to face to the north. So we've just made a compass. So that is actually north. And with north behind me here, we could go out now and try to look for some of the patterns we saw in the tree showing up in nature. This is something you can do today with just a few things at home, and this would help to make everything an interesting activity for you to do outside. More when we return.
Today's subject is patterns. A pattern is made of a set of the elements such as lines, color, shapes, and object. You can find the patterns in everywhere, such as you can see the patterns in my apron, patterns in my cushion, so you can see lines, color, shapes, and repetitions. That's the pattern. So today, I want you to be an investigator and artist at the same time. So what you need is a piece of paper, hold it out so you can make small notes, sketchbook, and also you need pencil. So you go out and investigate patterns in the house and even in your backyard. So I already did my investigation today. The first pattern I recognize is patterns on rug. So as you can see, I copied the color here, but if you wish, you can change the color if you like. The second pattern I recognize is the tiles in my bathroom. So this is the actual color, but you can change the color if you like. The most intriguing patterns I found is this little bonsai. I really love the patterns and leaves here. So I observed and I drew the leaves. And I created patterns inside these leaves using my imagination. And then I colored with my color pencil. So you can find the patterns everywhere, inside the house, in nature. I want you to be curious, be imaginative, and most of all, have fun with the patterns today.
And welcome back here. We are outside the classroom, outside right now actually, outside of my house, and we're here for you. This is an idea that we came up with last week, how we can bring each other together, share ideas and lessons and activities so that we can keep that learning process going, so that we can just simply focus on learning, not necessarily completing tasks, and really to try and help us all get through this and share some activities. We just heard from my wonderful colleague Hiromi, and she is an incredibly and an exceptional talented teacher and artist, and we hope you can use some of her ideas. We also heard from my colleague as well, Sarah, and the idea of trying to get patterns in speech and in dialect and in learning some of the letters and everything related to English and literature. So we left off just a few minutes ago looking at how we could develop certain types of patterns in nature and how we can kind of identify those patterns. We talked about looking at and trying to identify differences between the direction and north-facing and a south-facing section of a tree. We made a compass, and remember, to make the compass, all you have to do is take something metallic, start scratching that onto something that you have from the refrigerator, a magnet to magnetize your object, put it on something that's floating in the water. You can make a homemade compass. And again, this is just with a bowl, some water, a leaf that's dry to float on the water, and a paper clip. That's telling me that that direction is north. So if you wanted to get outside and get to your yard or go to a park, you could actually make this compass inside the park. You don't have to do it at home. You can get outside and try to determine which direction is north, which direction is south, and ultimately then you can look for the differences perhaps showing up then in nature. So that's an idea for you. That's something that you could work on. Another thing we've been spending some time with is figuring out how can we generate patterns. I'm going to have my son bring out another example here of a pattern. Seaton, thank you. We've got some very hot water that is steaming right now. If you wanted to look for patterns in nature, patterns in weather, well, you can actually take an object, and you can get some really hot water, some steam, and you can let that steam begin to accumulate on the object. And then if you can try to trap that heat, trap that steam into that object, and then put it in the refrigerator, into the freezer, you can ultimately end up making ice crystals and potentially see the patterns of snowflake development, the same thing that's happening up in the clouds thousands of feet above our head. We can mimic and try to look for those patterns showing up on plastic and from steam, and we'll put that in the freezer. That's another idea for you. So experiment, see if you can get snowflakes to grow, and if you can, great. Take a picture of those snowflakes, send them to us, share them with us, and we'd love to feature them on the show. Another idea, again, listen for the sounds of the birds outside today and use our website and our Stormwatch 7 weather blog. That's a great resource to determine what type of bird you're perhaps hearing. That's an idea for you. We'll be back in just a moment. And welcome back to Outside the Classroom. I'm Ryan Miller. Thank you so much for joining us. We have been investigating and looking at ideas of how patterns show up in our daily lives. One of the things we have been spending some time with here is how can we look at patterns potentially showing up in snowflakes. And if you take a plastic container, again, this is all stuff that you could easily get at home. If it's around, we're going to let some steam accumulate into this plastic container. As the steam steam accumulates, then what you can do is immediately take and put the lid on it and then put this in the freezer and let it go, let it freeze up, and then eventually what you'll be able to see are some of the ice crystals that are going to start to form on the outside and perhaps on the inside. Ice crystals have patterns, they develop in patterns, and this would be a great way, although it's quickly fading because it's warm out here, a great way to get some patterns to show up in nature. Speaking of patterns, we have weather patterns that we deal with as a meteorologist. We have to pay attention to the behavior of the atmosphere and look for patterns in that. Taking a look at the calendar and when we've picked up meaningful and measurable rainfall, boy, I'll tell you what, if you'll remember back to January, we got into one of those weather patterns where it rained almost every weekend and almost every Saturday. So in January, 3 out of the 4 weekends, well, we had measurable rainfall. Why? Because the Earth's behavior, the Earth's atmosphere has a behavior and it can develop into a pattern. In February, we switched that pattern around where we actually went from weekends that were wet to weekends that were dry, and our weekdays actually ended up being rather wet. And every Wednesday, if you can take a look at the calendar, that was another example of a pattern showing up and a way that we can actually look at and monitor the behavior of the atmosphere through patterns. So there are lots of ideas that you could potentially think of in terms of using patterns and looking at patterns and investigating patterns throughout the day. We hope that you would actually take a moment to go outside, to look at and listen and try to pick up the little things, to identify patterns in nature, patterns in life, patterns in architecture, music, and in art. There are so many patterns out there, and we would invite you to share them. You've got some homework, if you don't mind. Remember, we're learning here. We're not checking boxes. We have some homework. Share the patterns in your life, the patterns that you find. Share them with us. We'd love to see them. And not only that, we'd love to showcase them tomorrow on our show. So you can send them to us on our website. You can send them to us on Twitter. Any way you can connect with us, we'd really appreciate it. Send us your patterns. And tomorrow, we're going to keep going with that theme of patterns and look for more examples that are outside the classroom. I'm meteorologist Ryan Miller. Thank you so much for tuning in.